Hello everybody, how are you? I hope you're well. So I'm going to tell you today about my friend Mark. Yes, I had a friend. I know that's hard to believe, but I did. He's no longer with us. And I want to tell you a little bit about him and about his life as a Jehovah's Witness. I'll tell you all about it on the other side. So my friend Mark was my best friend when I was growing up. We were both Jehovah's Witnesses and we used to be best buddies. He was a little bit older than me, but in the same year, but older than me. Older, but not wiser. Mark was part of a family of Jehovah's Witnesses. His dad was horrible. Horrible. He was more horrible than my dad. And that is saying something. Right, Jehovah's Witness fathers in that period were pretty horrible. Why? Because they believed in the fact that if you were going to spoil a child, then you would spare the rod. And so Mark used to be, his dad was less physical and more mental. His dad was completely mental, to be honest. And so he would punish him and he would use violence, but mental violence. He would tell him he was stupid, he was worthless, he was no good. Right? No good. So Mark and I, as Jehovah's Witnesses, were probably the worst version that you could imagine of a Jehovah's Witness. Were we different to anybody else? No. All of us were the same. We were mingers when it came to what people would imagine was a Jehovah's Witness, which is, a kind, loving person that follows the rules of the Bible, or the organisation, better said, not the Bible. And we were terrible. Mark was especially terrible. He was like, if I was a bit wild, he was wild multiplied by 1,000. So by the time he was 15, he was an alcoholic. And what I mean by that is I would go and stay sometimes at his house. We were, even when he was young. Under his mattress, he would always have a quarter bottle of whiskey. Quite where he got the money for that, I don't know. But he always had a quarter bottle of whiskey. And so he would spend his life slightly drunk. He drank a lot. So did I, but not as much as him. I certainly wasn't into quarter bottles. I was more into lager and stuff like that. So wild was Mark that eventually he moved away from his home and his family heaved a sigh of relief because he was wild. And I'll get into why he was wild. And then he moved away and we lost touch. And I didn't see him for decades. And then finally one day he found me on Facebook or whatever and he reached out and he said, "Hey Gordon, lovely to see you. How are you?" And so we started to chat and hey, it was like going back in time. I talked to him on the phone. It was lovely. It was just like talking to, an old friend, which it was. Yeah. It wasn't like, it was. I was talking to an old friend. He'd become a fireman. He was taking care of his partner who was disabled or whatever. He completely turned his life around. He'd stopped drinking, or he drank very little. And so we agreed to meet. He was going to come over and spend some time with me, and I was very excited. I think when you meet people from your childhood, sometimes it can be great, sometimes it can be a bit of a letdown, but I was excited about it. And so we arranged, and then began the plan-demic. And so we had to sort of defer his coming over, but he said, "Hey, as soon as it's over, I'll come over." Then I heard that he died. Okay. What did he die of? Well, what he died of was a stroke. Right? Now, he was the same age as me, just not quite a year older than me. And he died of a stroke. Now, he was a fireman. And firemen in the UK generally got that. So, for me, there's an expression here in Spain, if it is white and in a bottle, it's milk. Okay? And so I thought, okay, I have a feeling that that's what that was. But hey, the Jehovah's Witnesses, my dad and the group of Jehovah's Witnesses, they had a different story. My dad, who informed me about Mark dying, first of all, he said, Mark's died. And I said, really? Wow, I just talked to him a little while ago. What happened? And he said, well, because he was an alcoholic and it was his liver gave up on him. Okay, that's what my dad told me. And that's the story that went around the Jehovah's Witnesses department. Then I talked to his mum to say sorry, His mum's still alive. And she said, yeah, he died of a stroke. Just sitting on the couch one night watching the TV, and that's it, collapsed. And that was it. And they actually had the funeral during that horrible, stupid time. And they had it on video, like on Zoom. Him, alone, in Scotland. Nobody at his funeral, and his family watched on. However, there is a backstory to this. The reason I'm telling you all of this is that Mark was brought up in a cult, as was I. And people who were brought up in cults, strict religious cults, become perverted. And I mean that in every sense of the word. Their natural balance is perverted and they become, I've used this expression, like a balloon. If we're a balloon that's blown up, we're beautiful, lovely shape, natural shape. And then somebody puts loads of pressure on us to try and be something that we're not. And so the balloon becomes distorted. And like me, Mark was distorted, but more. He was very distorted. And I think the alcohol had a lot to do with that. So what happened one day was that he said to me, hey, the school's over, 16 we were. End of school, why don't we celebrate? And I said, I'd love to celebrate. How should we do that? And he said, why don't we buy 2 bottles of sherry, QC sherry. Why QC sherry, I don't know, but it's good to get drunk on. And he said, why don't we go up to the hills, there were some hills near us in South Shields, and we'll drink and we'll get drunk. That's, to me, at 16, that is a celebration. You don't need anything else. You don't need a disco, anything like a dance floor. No, just a bottle of QC and a place to drink it. And that's what we did, effectively. We went up to the hills and we drank a bottle of QC. Now, we drank it very quickly. So quickly that it really hadn't taken effect. And so Mark, in his semi-stupor, said, hey, why don't we go and get another bottle each? So I said, hey, well, we're celebrating, we might as well, because this is what Jehovah's Witnesses do. So we went back to the shop, and there was an Indian shop who would sell anybody anything. So we went in, we were 16. He looked a bit older than me, but we weren't 18. And sure enough, we came out with our bottles of QC. We went back up to the hills and we drank the second bottle each. By the time that we got, I don't think I finished mine, I was absolutely pelagic, as the expression goes. Mark was, have you seen alcoholics when they drink? Some alcoholics, they don't get drunk. They go into this strange place where they become very glassy-eyed and very distant. And they're not showing signs of drunkenness. That's where Mark was. So we were walking along the hills, the cliff top. And Mark turned to me and he said, do you know what? I think I would like to end it all. And I was thinking, what? I was drunk, obviously, so I was ha ha ha. And so he started to run toward the edge of the cliff. There was this big cliff, right? Definite death at the bottom. And he threw himself toward the cliff. Well, in my drunken state, I wasn't scared of anything. You're not, are you? At 16 when you're drunk. And so I threw myself at his legs and rugby tackled him and stopped him from throwing himself off the cliff. Right? Came as a bit of a surprise to me, but that was where he was. He hated his life. He had a horrible life. He had a horrible father. He had a horrible religion. And he felt horrible about himself. So that was what happened. Anyway, he got back up and I said to him, Mark, you're not going to do that. All right? And he said, okay, I won't. And we carried on walking. just like that. I won't then. Okay. And we carried on walking. And then he said to me, I tell you what, I feel a bit like, why don't we see if we can find a woman? Okay? These were his words. Why don't we see if we can find a woman? And if we find one, let's have sex. Okay? Now, I'm not going to use the words that really means, but you know what it's like. This would be non-consensual. And I said to him, fortunately, we were at the top of the hills. There are not many sort of random women walking around just on their own at the top of the hills. So I thought, well, I'll just dismiss that. That's ridiculous. And anyway, we continued walking. And then he turned to me with his glassy look and he said, I tell you what, I've had a better idea. I know where we can find a woman. Okay? And he mentioned the name of the girl, who happened to be another Jehovah's Witness who lived just at the bottom of the hills. Okay? Just at the bottom. She was my good friend. I was friends with the family. And so he said, I am going now to find that girl, who I think she was 15, and do things with her. And he broke off into a gallop, right? And I was like, what? I mean, certain things were going through my mind. We are extremely drunk. If we get caught being extremely drunk, we'll be in big trouble. And she's my friend, so no. So I started to run after it, down the hill, at speed, but he was fast. I've got to say, well, he obviously had a burning in his loins that made him run faster. The house was just literally at the bottom of the last hill that we ran down. By the time I arrived, he'd already knocked at the door. Now, bear in mind, she lived with her parents, and I was fully expecting her parents to open the door. But no, as I arrived, the door opened and there appeared my good friend, 15-year-old Julie. Mark said, we've come for a drink. Can we have a drink? Well, she looked at the two of us and said, what the dickens? She didn't say what the hell because you're not allowed to as a Jehovah's Witness. What the dickens have you been doing? Mark pushed his way into the house, pushed her in, and then started to maul her, grabbing her, and she was screaming. So what happened then, what ensued in the passageway was this. I tried to pull Mark off her, saying, I'm really sorry. He was grabbing at her everywhere. And so I started to fist fight Mark. I'd never had a fist fight in my life. But I was so drunk and he was so drunk. It was like a fist fight that you would see like a stooge fist fight. It was bizarre. The slowest punches ever. But I was punching him, right? Bam, bam, bam. And he wouldn't stop. He was like an animal, like a man possessed. Until finally I knocked him to the floor, sat on top of him. And then, all credit to Julie. She said, I think I better make you both a coffee. And so we sat him down, right? He calmed down. I think it was all the punching in the face. He calmed down and he drank a coffee. And then we left. Fortunately, her parents weren't in. And then we left. And as we came out, I said, Mark, what the actual fuck have you just done? And then we went home. Well, I was really drunk. I went home and I went to bed. That was it. Just went straight to bed. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And Mark went home as well. The next thing I knew, I was awakened by 2 ambulance drivers who lifted me out of the bed, put some clothes on me and took me to hospital. When I got to hospital, there was Mark in a bed. So we had a room to ourselves. And they said my parents were there. My dad, you can imagine, was not a happy bunny, and nor was his dad. And they said, we are going to pump your stomachs out. Okay. Now, hey, I was drunk, but I'd been to sleep for an hour or so. I was fine. I was absolutely fine. But they pumped our stomachs out. And they gave us a drink that made us vomit repeatedly, over and over again, gallons. They said that we had to drink about 5 litres of water. And then we were vomiting. It was like being at a typical ayahuasca session, without the fun. And then we spent the night there. In the meantime, Julie's parents had been on the phone to my parents and to Mark's parents and explained what had happened, that Mark had tried to do that to her. However, the only saving grace to the whole thing was that I had stopped him. And so for whatever reason, I was then hailed as the hero and Mark as the baddie. Okay? And, well, he was. I mean, let's be honest. He was pretty much the baddie. And so, even though I was drunk, I got what was called like an unofficial, I got a yellow card. Okay? I got a yellow card. That was because I had been brave enough to stop the act, but I'd been drunk at the time. And so I just got a chat. One of the elders said, don't do that again. And I said, I won't. Okay? Mark, on the other hand, was chucked out, as you would expect. He was chucked out. And he went away. He moved away. And that was how we ended up losing touch. But for a little while, I had the hero cape on. And Julie's mum actually said thank you to me, which was interesting, given that I was part and parcel of the problem, really, although only a small part, the drunken part. So why am I telling you all of this very detailed story? The reason I'm telling you it is that what I saw when I was a Jehovah's Witness, as a young Jehovah's Witness, and as I got older, was that all of them were like that. And I don't mean that in a broad, I do mean that in a broad brush state. All of my friends were absolutely weird. The Jehovah's Witnesses, weird and wild. The things that we did were nobody's business. The things that we did were way above what normal kids would do. Why? Because we were distorted, perverted, and our whole outlook on life had been destroyed. Poor Mark went on to do other things. Not good. And all with a sexual orientation, until none of his family spoke to him except his mum. Okay? Except his mum. And I remember the last conversation I had with Mark, he said to me, do you know what? My dad said to me the other day, hey, I'm really proud of you, son, for what you've done. Because he'd become a fireman. Okay? And Mark said that was the most important thing that I've ever heard in my life, that my dad said that he was proud of me. Why? Because his dad had been a horrible git to him all of his life. And not only that, but he'd been a bit of a bad boy, and so his whole family had ignored him, except for his mum. And that's the story of my friend Mark, who now is somewhere else. I hope he's healing. I hope he's feeling better. And I'm sure that he managed to resolve all of his issues, or at least best part of them, before he shuffled off this mortal coil. But I want to leave you with one story. This is the caliber, and this is not unusual. This is bog standard stuff. In one meeting, Mark and I used to do the microphones. If you were a good boy, you got job as a microphone kind of attendant. So when people were answering rote stuff, just repeating the same old shit, we would hold the microphone in front. One of us would hold the microphone in front of them, and the other one would be working the box, turning up the volume, turning it down. One night I was on the box, okay? I was working the box, very boring. My mind used to wander. And Mark was on the mics. And so he had his Bible. Okay, and everyone must have been looking at him going, look at Mark reading his Bible. He's such a good Christian. And what he was doing over his shoulder, he was using hand signals to signal books of the Bible, chapters, and then verses. And what he was doing was he was signaling all of the verses and the chapters and the verses in the Bible that had sexual content. And we did this for half an hour because there's loads. The Bible's filled with virgins and all kinds of terrible things that go on in the Bible. And he we did it backwards and forwards. I was looking because we had an index at the back, so you just look for sex, for whatever. And so we would share scriptures for about half an hour. And probably everyone was looking at us with the Bible thinking, oh, bless them. You can't say bless you as a Jehovah's Witness. You're not allowed to. Only God can bless. You can't bless. And we did that. And that's kind of where we were mentally as Jehovah's Witnesses. So when you look at a Jehovah's Witness or anybody who's in a cult, and they're smiling and they're all dressed nicely and they've got a bit of a briefcase under their arm, and they're talking to you about paradise and about God and how everything's lovely and God loves you as long as you do exactly what we tell you. Just understand that if you lift that veil, underneath there's a bit of rotten. There's a lot of rotten. That doesn't make them bad people. It makes them distorted, perverted people. And I mean that perverted by something. And that's a shame. However, for that reason, I would never go back to being a Jehovah's Witness. Why? Because I've got myself sorted now, and they haven't. And so have you had experiences like that with Jehovah's Witnesses or with other culty people? Have you been in a cult? And if you have, what was your experience? And did you see this weird behaviour that culty people demonstrate when they're trying to be holier than thou, and they actually got more holes in them than thou? I love you all, and I'll speak to you all later. Bye-bye.